Hi, I'm Beth Gentilesco, and I am the chairperson of the Department of Medicine's DEI committee.
Hello, my name is Debasri Banerjee. I am the director of the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee at Brown Physicians Incorporated. So in terms of my JEDI committee and kind of being the director of that, it actually happened pretty organically. It started at the behest of the fellows in my division. So I'm in pulmonary critical care. My trainees came to us saying, we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're working really hard clinically and we're seeing all these health disparities. And not only that, we're also noticing that, there have been a lot of kind of racially motivated violence in the country, and we don't feel well equipped to handle it. And faculty obviously echoed this as well. And so therein kind of emerged this idea to create a committee, which was initially in our division and then kind of grew into the department and now BPI-wide thing.
Yeah, on my front, I would say I started maybe 5 to 6 years ago learning about race in medicine, learning about disparities in medicine. Started to read a lot, became very interested in how we as physicians were teaching our trainees about race in medicine, and became kind of a de facto expert among our colleagues. And then I was asked to chair the DEI committee, and the department hadn't had a DEI committee before that. And since then, we've been active for a few years now, and we work on issues of patient care in terms of equity. We work on issues of teaching and education for faculty and trainees. We keep data on our diversity and those efforts within all of our recruitment efforts. As we're going to talk about, I think there is a new requirement that people participate in DEI work as part of their faculty dossier and as part of promotion. And I think that the key there is how can we participate in meaningful work? To kind of take it in a few different buckets, one way that as a faculty member you can participate in meaningful equity work is within the patient care that you do. So if the patient care that you oversee or your patient population is disenfranchised in some way, underserved in some way, somehow marginalized population, then that work, of course, counts towards this overall mission. And so some examples of that, if you work in the refugee clinic where we welcome refugees from all over the world, or most recently from Afghanistan, if you work at the Rhode Island Free Clinic or Clinica Esperanza, those are examples of being involved in patient care work that can kind of count for this requirement. I would say that if you're a teacher and you teach about these ideas, if you have expertise in cultural humility or bystander training or upstander training, if you know something about disparities in your particular area of expertise and you teach about those to the residents, to the fellows, that will count as well, or that's meaningful. And then, of course, any QI project will be that pertains to patient disparities, to outcomes, or to learning will count. I think the key is to be aware of what it is that you're doing and to think about the ramifications of that rather than create a new box to tick. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in what are we doing to meaningfully move this needle?
Yeah, I think you said it so well. I don't know that I'd have much to add except maybe to just echo what you said. And I think if we can figure out exactly what the needs are, and really that comes from the voices of those who have been marginalized, right? And kind of centering them. If you keep your eyes and ears open and kind of figure out what it is that we might be kind of complicit in, or that we are omitting, in our day-to-day activities, and there'll be a lot of fodder for things that we can do that will then have a meaningful impact. And I think another important piece of that is kind of how to study that rigorously, right? So how do we know that it is meaningful in the end? And I think we need a way to be able to measure that, and not necessarily quantitatively, it could be qualitatively, but just somehow to be able to make the case that, the things we are doing are in fact helping. And that's kind of how we're able to build.
So Deb, one of the good examples that I have heard of recently of somebody doing something that's meaningful, that kind of fulfills this requirement, is that Andrew Forterero gave a noon conference in which he talked about how pulmonary function tests are interpreted. And part of that was teaching about the history of racial discrimination built in the machine and in interpretation. I don't know what do you think about that?
Oh my, it's such a big topic in our field right now in pulmonary. And we have a local expert, Bundy Braun. She's nationally well known, and she's a professor at Brown, which is very cool. And our big societies have just come out with statements regarding kind of how to have not a race-based interpretation in these medical algorithms, which I think is kind of going to move the needle going forward for a bunch of different specialties, I imagine.
I like that example because it takes something that you and your colleagues in pulmonology do and work with every day and looks at it through a different lens and uses that to both change practice patterns for your patients and change the way we teach the trainees. Yeah, I think that's a really nice example. Maybe we should talk a little bit about JEDI and how, what that's been like.
So JEDI itself, I gave you the backstory of it, but what it entails now, or at least the initial phase, has been a lot of kind of education, so foundational education for faculty members especially, because I felt like from our initial pilot, it seemed like that's where the gap was biggest in terms of knowledge about race and racism in medicine. And I think nowadays, medical schools are trying to incorporate into their curriculum. So it's really kind of at the faculty or more senior trainee level where I think, we need to deliver that piece more. So foundational knowledge, and I'm hoping, and this kind of came in the form of a 7-part long seminar series that was longitudinal over the course of a year for multiple different departments. But I'm hoping what it evolves into is something that's more kind of even more interactive and that will help change practice, as you said, because I think ultimately that's what we all hope for. So workshops that will kind of give you a product or be able to give you a practice pattern that you can walk out with, right? Like a tool.
Yeah.
So they might include things like, how to write a good letter of recommendation that's without bias, right? How to describe our patients in the medical record, how to do morbidity and mortality with less of a blame and shame type of atmosphere and rather more kind of focusing on restorative justice. I think things of that nature are my goals, my vision for what JEDI can be.
I am open to anybody has an idea about how to participate. I'm happy to field that. I do have a couple of examples of things I've heard of that people have done that I think are wonderful and mostly organic programs. One of our physicians in the refugee clinic started a program where during Ramadan they do sessions with patients and nutritionists about how to fast safely during Ramadan. And it's both equity for the patients and their patient population, but I think it has ripple effects, of course, because what that shows our trainees is very important in terms of listening to our patient population, seeing what the needs are. There's also content knowledge. I think everybody learned something about how do you fast safely during Ramadan or not. And it really also helped build a sense of esprit among the trainees. So that's one example of an ad hoc, totally organically grown program that speaks to these kind of philosophies. A second example, which is happening right now, which is really exciting, is that we had a case. This is a case-based program, QI project, where, as it turned out, the fact that a patient was discharged with a medication, the medication instructions were in English, but the patient was not a native English speaker. And so we've been that case was brought to the department, and we had an interested faculty member and an interested resident, and they've teamed up and they're working with pharmacy and with the IT folks to investigate what's at our disposal for having medication instructions, pill bottles, and discharge instructions able to be translated into a patient's first language. And I think those are great examples of kind of ground up, very quality-driven, equity-driven initiatives that people can get involved with.
That's awesome. I mean, and on top of that, there's like the organizational piece too. So if you wanted to be part of like the hiring committee for your division, you know, there's a DEI lens that should be applied, right, to the hiring process. So you can get involved in that. And then each department has a committee like that. And then also at the BPI level, there is a DEI committee that people can get involved in, certainly as well.
And at the lifespan level too.
At the lifespan level also. And then, you know, people can look to their societies and foundations. There's always something to do on the national or international scale as well. And I think in terms of the types of ways one can get involved, we shouldn't forget advocacy and volunteerism, right? So kind of being out there, you know, serving kind of different organizations and groups that are in our communities already doing this work, I think is a nice way to be able to show and promote your support of DEI initiatives. And then people get involved in being like board members for these organizations as well.
This happens to me not infrequently, that I get an email or a call. It's one of my favorite things that happens. Hey, Beth, I have an idea. Can you help me implement it? And I sure can. I think of it as one of the privileges of having a committee whose mission is to do this. So a cold call or email to me or to anyone on that committee will certainly suffice. We're a small family in general, so it's not any harder than that. In terms of where you can get funding or support to do a project, I think we're working on, there are internal risk grants that we can apply for. They're internal to, there are divisional grants. There are certainly research grants within BPI if your idea is a research project. But then, as Deb said, I totally agree, within our own professional organizations nationwide or even internationally, there's a lot of interest and support for DEI work, and I would say particularly on disparities that affect patient populations that are at risk. So give me a call.
Yeah, give Beth a call. And then, you know, locally in terms of funding, outside of just the BPI grants, of which there are many that, you know, we can apply for, there are the Rhode Island Foundation has many grants that we can look at, and they certainly are, this is one of their priorities. And then in addition to that, the HES, the Health Equity Zones, the Department of Health, they also have kind of small grant funding mechanisms that can help folks who are looking to, you know, jumpstart a project.
So recently the Supreme Court, in a really landmark decision, decided in the case of both the University of North Carolina and in Harvard that the application and admissions processes violated equal protection. And this is a really interesting idea. Essentially, they've said in all higher education that race can't be used as an independent characteristic in determining admission. And this is a real change for for every school. This applies not just to colleges and universities, but medical schools as well. So we're keeping a very close eye on this. And I think the important thing for us to remember, and it's been reiterated by the heads of all of our national organizations and professional organizations, is that we will do everything we can to comply with the law where we have to, and where our processes need to change. And at the same time, our vision and our philosophy doesn't have to change. And I think in medicine, we have a really clear mandate, which is we, over time, have taken care of people and their disparate outcomes. And why do we have these disparities? We don't know the answers to all that, but one of our answers is, let's have the landscape of the doctors who are taking care of the patients be a little bit more like the landscape of the patients whom we take care of. And I think that's really logically defensible. And that's kind of my vision and philosophy of what it means to work for equity on an institutional level. So that mission and philosophy won't change while we, of course, adhere to what may be new laws and how we can recruit students to our medical schools, and then potentially changes in employment laws that are coming down the line.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. And some states have been kind of working without the protection of affirmative action even in the past.
Yeah.
And so, what we've learned from these states like California with their proposition is that it in fact does exacerbate disparities, right? So we've known that it started in 1996, for the last 2 decades plus, we've already seen the impact. So, from this SCOTUS decision, we're just it's the tip of the iceberg. We're just going to start to see the reverberations, going forward. And I think, right on the heels of that decision was also the one to repeal the funding for absolving people of student debt, at least some as part of the HEROES Act. And so I think that's also going to disproportionately affect BIPOC students and those kind of entering the workforce in healthcare because, it's an expensive training that has to happen. And so again, I think it's kind of a 2-hit blow.
If you have any questions about DEI or interested in participating in a project, in a QI project, in any advocacy that we do, by all means, just send us an email, send me an email, call. I'm always happy to field a question. And as I said, it's my favorite thing when somebody reaches out to start to join our work.
And she means it, because I've definitely called her before about things. But I, too, extend that invitation. So if anyone has any questions, or if you're not even sure what you want to do, please don't hesitate. We're always here, and this is the stuff we love to do.